we are looking to establish local delivery units to take forward locally the plans that are set out in the STP. And across our patch, Fareham and Gosport, we are part of a wider system working with Portsmouth hospitals, with Solent, with Southern, and indeed other voluntary sectors, to look at how we can address and implement the STP going forward. We've talked about establishing what we're terming an ACS, which is an accountable care system, and this essentially is a mechanism through which providers, voluntary sectors and others will work together to deliver the objectives. Conversations are currently early stages, and we'll bring back details around the governance, structures, etc. in due course to future governing bodies. But I would suggest there have been very encouraging conversations and agreements across the system to work collaboratively to deliver the changes needed. Winter pressures, particularly wanted to pick up some of the challenges we've had over Christmas and the New Year. A lot of press discussion recently, and particularly over Christmas and New Year specifically. For our system, there have and continue to be challenges with Portsmouth Hospital. However, I think there was some really good work, and Sheila may cover this later in the board discussions, but some really good planning went into the work-up during Christmas and the New Year. And whilst we did have a significant number of pressures in terms of attendances and medically fit, discharge-ready patients within the acute hospital, we maintained a reasonable performance, although we did have a couple of days, which were challenging to the system. But resilience was strong, and response and working across the system was good as well. In addition to that, and recognising that January, the first week of January, is always a difficult time with people starting back at work and moving on from Christmas, we've put in place what we've called a winter warmer event, which is a perfect week, which is for all system providers to work together, to look at flow, to look at how we can ensure a really optimal pathway and management of patients through the system during that week, and lessons learned are then taken and used to inform new ways of working there and beyond. Sheila may want to get into a little more detail after that. We've been advised of some additional non-recurring monies to support transformation, again to support the delivery of the STP. These are around 4 key areas, around cancer, mental health, LD, learning disabilities, and diabetes treatment and prevention. Bids are being submitted for the 18th of January, which is today at 5 p.m, and the systems have been working hard. From our point of view, we have played into all of those, and we have and will provide governing body with details of the successful bids once we have noted. I'm being optimistic that we will receive additional resource to help us on that transformation journey. Southern Health Foundation Trust has engaged Deloitte, working with Northumberland, Tyne and Wear, who are undertaking a clinical services review, particularly around mental health and LD. We're actively playing a strong role in that, and I know that there has been engagement with patients, staff and the like. We are expecting a report in due course, and will of course ensure and update the board as we see, as recommendations are proposed.
Yes, so what the governing body have received today is the published version of the Hampshire and the Isle of Wight Sustainability and Transformation Plan. I hope you will recognise the content of the plan, drawn upon from the previous drafts that have been considered by the governing body and endorsed by the governing body. What I'm asking for from the governing body today is to note the content of the plan and continue to commit to the broad vision and ambitions set out within the plan. To note similarly that we will now embark on a period of socialisation of the plan, so sharing it more widely with local citizens, communities and stakeholders, and working with Health Watch and the Health and Wellbeing boards embark on a series of, I'll use the word consultation, with local citizens around a number of core questions that we'll work on collectively with local government, with the local Health and Wellbeing Board chairs and with the Health Watch team. And that will help us inform and refine the overarching strategic ambitions. In the meantime, to note that the implementation and delivery of some of the early requirements of the STP will be taken forward, as Alex says, through the local delivery system for Portsmouth and South East Hampshire, of which there will be, over the course of the next 3 months, the development of a operating model and a government structure that will ensure the implementation of those arrangements. So happy to answer questions. It's a very long document, but welcome input and thank you.
Right, and then
Yeah,
Sarah?
just on page 19, the Mental Health Alliance, I was just interested, when you look at the work streams in other areas and then you look at the key personnel, and I probably should have picked this up sooner, you've got, it just seems a bit light, the key personnel with mental health. In other areas you've got finance director involved, and you've got quality director. Here you don't, so I'm taking it, rightly or wrongly, that the work will be done through the Mental Health Alliance, as well as the key personnel. That's where this work's going to be led. In which case, can I just ask the question about how will finance play into that? How will the financial leadership be, be monitored through that? If I've made any sense.
So I'll ask Andy to corroborate, but I think it was a moment in time. So actually the Mental Health Alliance has got the most well-developed and well-established core programme team, including commissioning representation, all partner programme representation. The finance leadership is through Paula Anderson from Southern Health, and the FD, the finance directors, meet on a monthly basis to make sure that there's communication and discussion around those programmes. The chair has moved now of the Mental Health Alliance literally last week from Sue Harriman and across to Karen Baker, who's Chief Exec of the Isle of Wight Healthcare Trust. And of course we have also appointed an independent chair for the Mental Health Alliance, whom I will get back for the record, but whose name eludes me with my embarrassment, I'm sorry.
It kind of relates to Alex's update as well on the accountable care system. So I'd just like to, how will the governing body be updated on the progress that's been made on that local implementation, given that it's at the local level that the implementation and delivery is really focused? And what are the governance arrangements around that in terms of the role of the governing body and how we kind of are assured around that progress, given it's such a critical programme?
And I think they're really helpful points to raise, Sarah, and I think we're at a stage where we need to confirm and work those through. So I don't think we're at a point yet where we can fully describe that, but what would be really helpful is to put some proposals that we can inform those conversations. It would be helpful, wondering whether we have a bit more lay representation or around the governance structure around the ACS, and we probably need to give that a bit more thought as it develops. In terms of oversight, we remain a statutory organisation. We remain responsible for the implementation and delivery of some of the changes required, so it will still get reported through governing body meetings and fora, but how we ensure lay representation at an ACS level, I think, requires further discussion and debate with our partners as well. There is a proposal to establish an accountable care system board with the chairs and chief officers of the organisations there. So it, I suspect, will be one of the areas of work that will need to be taken forward through that route. So I think it is evolving, Julia, and I think further work is required, and chiefs are part of some of those conversations. Again, quite a lot of detail needs to be worked through still, and we've given ourselves 3 months in which to progress that debate and conversation. But rest assured, governing body and chiefs are absolutely instrumental to shaping and informing and involving that.
is really just to say from the other end of the spectrum, so from the STP, as the leader, I'm comfortable with. I'm not dictating what governance model and what operating model is established, but I am describing the functions and the products that I'm expecting from each local delivery system. So, and that's part of the conversation now that's happening between the STP leadership team coming down to local delivery systems and saying, I don't mind how you configure yourselves, but these are the characteristics I want to see, which is a clear single operating plan, a clear single financial plan, etc., etc. So I can share that through the governing body if that's helpful.
I don't know where it was because it's such a huge document, and at the time when I was reading it, I couldn't make my little marker work. So, I just wanted to ask, working with partners, particularly working with Hampshire County Council, and possibly the local district councils. I'm not quite sure, but certainly with Hampshire and the equivalent, obviously in the unitaries, looking at things like delayed transfers of care, that sort of issue. The engagement, I'm sure there has been engagement. I wasn't sure if I could see any explicit reference to how important social services are for the outcome of many of the things that we're trying to do with health. And it doesn't just apply to discharges, it applies to lots of other things. Could you speak a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, so it's one of the areas that I think the work programme has had some real strength to it. So it's not just around individual local authority working with individual commissioning organisations. So it's not about Fairham Gosport working with Hampshire County Council. It is, but actually what we've established through this transformation programme is that we've now created a alliance of adult social care directors. So all the adult social care directors now work together and have appointed a dedicated programme manager. And the role that they are working on is harmonising and standardising the approaches around how adult social care connect into health across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. So for us, very materially, that means that what we won't get is Portsmouth City Council's approach to managing the discharge process around social care will be different to that Hampshire County Council operates. So the efficiency opportunities and systems benefit of that. Similarly, we've been very fortunate in the Discharge and Flow programme, as an example, has been led by Director of Adult Social Care, Graham Allen from Hampshire County Council. We've had clearly local government and local authority chief exec all core to the programme and sat around the executive delivery group board, ensuring that the programme is consistent with that. The public health programme, the prevention programme, has been led by the local authority public health team, and in the new care models, the work around conceiving the future, we've had all the directors of adult social care involved in the development and production of that plan. So probably the weaker area of the engagement has been we haven't been able to, and Andy can kind of corroborate this, we haven't been able, because of the way local government finances have been established, which is they're only now going through the setting of next year's budget for 17-18, we haven't and weren't able to fully embed the full local authority spend profile in the financial models for the health sector around the STP. We put a kind of assessment of the impact, but we didn't get a full insight into the financial journey because their cycle is different to that of the NHS.
Rich, I had a couple of points. This is a very ambitious plan around the STP, and a lot of it is around relationships, culture. I wondered, is that being seen as an STP programme of work, or is it the expectation it's done in the local delivery units? And if it's done in local delivery units, just interested to know what support the STP is able to provide to support that.
Yeah, I should probably have said at the outset that I'm under no illusions, nor is any of the leaders around the table, that this is more than a very ambitious plan. This is probably the most ambitious transformation programme that I have encountered in my time in the NHS. It's not because we embark on this because we're overt optimists. We embark on it because we recognise that the challenges we face in health and care need to be addressed, and therefore it requires quite a very ambitious and quite radical set of transformational programmes, many of which have been laid down in previous national policy, and this is the implementation of these. So I wouldn't want the governing body to be under any illusions that this is A, completely formulated in all elements of its development, or B, without significant risk that needs to be mitigated by collective and partnership working. It's a really important point to come out. The second point is around the local alignment versus the STP, or the Hampshire and the Isle of Wight wide alignment. Because Hampshire and the Isle of Wight is one of the largest transformation footprints in the country, we reached an early conclusion that delivery is best owned and implemented on more natural communities of care. And Portsmouth and South East Hampshire have got a tradition of working together, and within it we've got 3 vibrant units of delivery: Fareham, Gosport, South East Hampshire and Portsmouth City. But Portsmouth and South East Hampshire is therefore what we're calling the local delivery system, and therefore the footprint for implementation. The relationships are fundamental within that health and care community, and unless all of the partners, be they the voluntary sector, the acute community, ambulance, commissioners and primary care, are pulling together, then there is little prospect of the delivery of a plan of this significance. And therefore my role is to encourage, cajole, assure, ensure and invest in the relationships at the local community level. And I think, and you know, that we've found some resources that I can provide to the local delivery system to invest in the success, both in infrastructure and culture of working. At a Hampshire and the Isle of Wight level, there are also relationships that need to be developed, confidence and structures. I think clinical leadership is, I know, because I'm doing it at the moment, clinical leadership is an area where we need to invest and back, to move from, in some areas, an instance of clinical representation to a model of clinical leadership. So clinicians empowered to truly lead the transformation journey rather than people representing a community of interest at a table. And therefore we're working with the Wessex and Thames Valley Leadership Academy to invest in empowering clinicians to feel mandated and equipped to lead the transformation rather than to be representing their interests on it. We're also creating development investment in teams around the design programme, so be it around digital, be it around this area. The final thing that's worth note, agreeing with the university sector and the academic health science network, goodness there are lots of acronyms and lots of organisations in this space, is that we are intent on making sure that how we change training for clinicians, it needs to change and adapt very rapidly, and how we give local resources for system change needs to be invested in very rapidly. So we're creating a network of model practices across each local delivery system where we can start to invest and trial the new ways of working and reward that practice for having people coming and looking and testing. And through Health Education England we'll be investing quite significantly in training people in a range of the e-consultation methodologies, and the role of the senior clinicians is going to change. I think a lot more about ensuring standards of care rather than doing as much sort of face-to-face interaction. So all of that is going to require quite significant changes in training and empowerment. Does that answer the kind of breadth of your question?
One last question. At PLAT's Community Engagement Committee for the CCG last week, there was 2 things that came out. It's a wonderful plan, and I really mean that. The potential here and the opportunity is huge. But a lot of the community group didn't actually recognise from the detail that's provided currently what it's going to mean at the ground level. So it's quite hard to say yes or no when you don't really know how it translates down to that. And one particular area came up, not just at that meeting, but a couple of other meetings, is the admirable shift from acute hospital care into communities. Absolutely right. The time frame to achieve that has always been challenging. You alluded already to the social care challenges that local authorities do. if we're starting to take funds out of the hospital sector now and put it into the community sector, which will take time to build up, and the training things take time to build up, is there not a potential for a gap when we're drawing down from one model, trying to establish another model? What happens to the patients in the interim? Because you've only got 3 years or so, 4 years to deliver this to 2020, haven't you?
Yes.
So there's 2 points.
Yeah, I mean, that's the. So we recognise that it's naive to presume that you can switch off one service and switch on another. There's a no overlap or double running process that you need to have. By definition, you need to double run in order to have confidence that the receiving service is established and competent and sound before you take significant resources out. That's in part what the national, what we want to use and deploy the national transformation revenue and capital that we will have access to. And Alex, in the Chief Officer's report, alluded to some of the early points of access that we've got to that revenue to allow for the development and double running of services. What we're not yet clear about is how we will secure that money on an ongoing basis, but we're learning over the course of the next month or two about how that resource will come through. Some of these processes, I think we tell ourselves they are very big bang changes, but actually I think it is about systematising existing delivery systems and delivery models. So rather than saying on one day we'll suddenly see a massive change, I think what we'll see is consistent, systematic, incremental implementation. So if I take, and I'll maybe reference Dr. Howden to this, we're looking at the model of outpatient care, particularly follow-up outpatient care. And the conclusion collectively is that quite significant amounts of follow-up outpatient care could be delivered in a very different way without the individual having to travel to an acute setting to have little clinical interaction and to be informed everything's fine and you can go home. And so the conversations are happening specialty by specialty to say, how could we remove 30% of these outpatient or 40% of these outpatients follow-up appointments without any deleterious impact on the individual's access to care? You know, it might well be if you've got a problem, phone us up and we'll schedule in, but if you don't, if you feel fine and there's no problems, then you don't need to. So I think what we'll see is now an implementation of all of each of these programs that will have a consistent and sound trajectory like that, rather than a flat and then an immediate impact. And my job is to ensure that each local delivery system has a sound set of operating plans and metrics that demonstrate that it is working on these programs, and if it's not, to challenge the pace and application of them, and to secure the resources available nationally to double run where that double running is necessary. But Paul, on that example.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're kind of helped in terms of sort of tariff changes for next year anyway. So in fact, actually, there's an imperative, I think, for the acute trusts because actually they won't be being paid as much for follow-up activity. So we're in a sort of a win-win scenario where, you know, as I say, the direction of travel is to move care away from the acute setting. I think this may act as a lever for things there. What we've got to ensure is that that's done in a safe and sustainable fashion, particularly given, you know, the issues we've alluded to in terms of sort of primary care workforce. So you can't just dump all these patients on practices, 30+% of which don't have enough doctors at this current point in time. So there's a lot of work to be done around that there, but I think it, you know, it just serves as a way of, you know, of us all looking and saying this is around the transformation piece. This is how we do things differently with the constraints that we have, and, you know, largely around workforce. So a lot of work going on around that. A lot of positive things happening already with a number of the specialties. So hopefully, you know, this as Richard says, it won't be big bang. It all happens overnight. This will happen in a sort of a graduated fashion.
And I would, sorry, David, I would just, page 34 is really important in the summary document, in that what it signals is that in many instances what we're not looking is radically reducing the current levels and displacement of activity. So if I take non-elective activity, what it's not saying is that we will see ultimately over the course of the duration dramatically fewer people being admitted non-electively in our acute setting. What we are saying is that over the course of the 5 years we will not incur the growth that we've incurred actually, Fareham and Gosport and South Eastern Hampshire, well up until November, have bucked the trend around levels of growth. But nationally, we expect to see about 4% growth of non-elective admissions year on year. And what we're saying across Hampshire and the Isles is that we will now stabilise that position, and the level of admissions will be maintained as is, rather than growing 4% year on year. Because if that was the case, given where we are at the moment, we would have to be investing in additional acute infrastructure, and that's just not tenable and not in the interests of local citizens. Julie, you want to...
It's a governance question, sorry. So I'm aware that the work programmes are all making significant progress. I'm just wondering, how do we as a governing body get, because this is the plan, the ongoing reports about the progress going forward, because it'd be really good to keep well sighted on that, I think.
So my expectation, and this goes back to Alex's debate, my expectation is whilst I will bring through Alex and David and Barbara, I will bring the high-level STP metrics and performance. It's my expectation, it's really important, I'm clear about this, it's my expectation that the CCG, in its partnership working model with local other commissioners and providers, will establish a local delivery system operating plan, which is there.
It wasn't so much the local system, but more the six work streams and the enabling one. So how, for example, the digital programme might affect other things that are going on.
Yeah.
Locally.
So we're sorry, Julia, I beg your pardon. No, my misinterpretation. So each of those work streams now has a delivery plan, what products it's bringing to market, by when. Some of them are less developed because they're contingent on national funding, transformation funding. So until the big risk we have in a number of these programs, if I take digital for example, is we've got, I think the word now is shovel ready, so we're ready to go, but unless we have secured the national transformation funding to back the implementation of the schemes, we will now have to build in an inevitable delay and go back and revisit how would we secure revenue or capital to meet them. But that will be through the national, the STP level reporting, all of which papers will be flowing through from the 7th of February through to governing body reporting.
Thanks very much indeed. So lots of debate on that, and necessarily so, and I'm sure we'll be talking about it for many years to come. Can we go on to the finance report, Andrew?
Thanks, David. I previously reported to the governing body how we made a deficit of £4 million last year and were required to repay that as we came into this year. So our plan for this year was to make a deficit of £4 million. I've also previously reported we've had no reserves or resilience to cover any cost pressures that arose over the course of the year. So as a result of mounting pressure, particularly on our acute contracts and also in continuing healthcare, at month 6 we moved our forecast deficit position out to 7 million, and I'm sad to have to report that following particularly bad month in month 9, we're now moving our forecast out to a deficit of 10 million for Fareham and Gosport CCG. About 3.5% of our budget, to give you some context. In terms of where the pressures are arising, as I mentioned before, we're looking at a £2.7 million overspend in the acute sector, £2.5 million for continuing healthcare. The good news, I suppose, is that by and large we're delivering the original savings programme we committed to deliver. We're delivering roughly 90% of that, but a shortfall of £1.5 million on that. So obviously a degree of challenge coming back from the area team in terms of what we're going to do about it. Given the lateness where we are in the year, it's quite difficult to actually land any control actions that will make a difference this year. And I think my main concern probably is what this means for next year's financial plans, given that we're already facing quite a substantial savings challenge. So we're working through that at the moment. I guess overall it sort of reiterates the importance to land the transformation work streams, because I think by and large we're doing all the traditional approaches. We've just had recently an audit of our programme management arrangements around savings, and that was a good audit report. So it feels like we're doing what we should be doing. We can always do more. We've got to be absolutely rigorous and chase every pound saving we can, but fundamentally it's about doing things differently.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. Just a couple of points, really. A reassurance I need, because if I think about where we were last year, we weren't talking about such a big deficit, but actually we still have problems with continuing healthcare. We still have problems with acute services, and here we are this year having the same conversation, and yet even more so because we're still now having to pay the deficit that we had last year. So I'm really concerned that we are in a position whereby we really are not sure how we're going to control next year. I'm sure there are some ideas and I'm sure there are some plans coming forward, but I think I would like to be reassured that we do manage to get control of this situation, because otherwise next year we'll have to pay the deficit for this year and onwards and onwards and onwards. So that's a concern for me. And then just one final a question for me. If you look at the key issues, just to help me to understand really, in the second part of that, so month 9 December, year to date the CCG is overspent by 7.5 million. Does that include the deficit for last year? It does. Yes. So the off plan year to date by 4.5 includes the deficit for last year or not? It does. Thank you.
One is, I suppose, one way of looking at this, the £10 million problem. Yes, it feels far worse than last year, but 4 million of that is a one-off repaying last year's deficit. 2.5 million more of that is this 1% risk reserve we were set aside to cover the NHS deficit nationally. So when you take those two out of the equation, it doesn't look quite so bad. The other thing to bear in mind is that the mechanism by which we have to repay the previous year's deficit is changing next year. So as a CCG, we're just required to break even, which is challenging in itself given where we are, but it does mean we haven't got this rather brutal repayment of the deficit before we go into next year. But we do have to come up with proposals about how we'll address that over a 4-year time frame. So it doesn't go away as an issue, but it makes life a bit easier.
So Andy, just to confirm therefore, what you're saying is we ended 15-16 with a 4 million deficit run rate, and whilst the technical numbers have moved, the run rate remains around 3.5-4%, 3.5-4 million deficit. Sorry. Okay, that's helpful.
I just want to know if we had had our equal share funding, because we're one of the underfunded CCGs, would we be breaking even? So what I want to know is, are we actually performing as well as other CCGs if we'd had the equivalent type of funding, or are we actually doing badly?
It's a moot point. Yes, if we played in the full amount to get to our fair shares, probably we would be there or thereabouts. The issue is that as far as the government are concerned, if we're within 5% of our funding target, that's as good as being there. So I don't have any great expectation that we'll get more funding in coming years, given as Richard said earlier, we've already been told what our 5-year allocations is. So it's part of the explanation, possibly. And all the indicators are that we're working quite an efficient system as it is. Ports and hospitals are below average in terms of their cost. We are comparatively poorly funded. So it makes it more difficult, actually. If we're already a relatively efficient system, what can you go after?
Although there are great efficiencies in CHC, and I think we are a national outlier with respect to CHC. Lucy?
Yeah, I was going to come to that, but first of all, can I say, so from what I heard you say, it sounds like we're punished for actually running a relatively tight ship, nationally that is. If we were a basket case, we'd get more help. No, well you said, I thought I heard you say that if we came within 5%, if we strive our utmost to get nearly there, and we're just 5%, then...
No, that's fair share. That's on fair share. So if you're within 5% of a national fair shares formula, then that's not a reason for adjusting the allocation.
All right, okay, I misunderstood that. The one I want to pick up on was what they said about CHC, continuing health care, which basically means, as far as I can understand, the big issue is because we've got a sort of a legacy of a huge legacy from the past, which we're still trying to pay down. Do we have any understanding? I mean, I suppose we're not God. We can't see how many people are going to need it next year. But do we have any understanding of how much worse it is likely to become? I mean, He's got to pay back the past, and what about today, and what about tomorrow? Can we? Is this something we can grip, or is it completely out of our control?
I think a bit of both, Lucy, to be honest. There's definitely, obviously, given the population demographics, there's a big increase each year, which we anticipate in our budget setting. The bit that I think causes us continual problems is the randomness of the numbers. One patient can cost £300,000 a year, so it doesn't take many patients to really make a difference on the numbers. There is undoubtedly something to do with learning disability services and a legacy of people that moved out of the former Cold Youth Hospital, which plays into this. And there's undoubtedly something to do with how Portsmouth Hospitals treats fast-track patients. As governing body are probably aware, we report this pretty much every month at the Financial Recovery Board, and we've got a whole variety of control actions in play. But I'm conscious we've not had a full conversation at governing body, so there's a paper coming to next month's meeting to talk in full about CHC, what we're doing about it, what can we do about it, and hopefully that will address the questions you're raising.
And some of those actions, some of those are not in our gift. For example, actually recruiting to assessors roles, there just aren't people out there, and that's something that's adding in a delay. But it's certainly the imperative. I mean, Lynn's been doing a huge amount of work on this, so it'll be an interesting, a really good paper that's going to be coming through.